Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about some of the major arcana cards, and I wanted to talk about some of the cards from a perspective of the major arcana being representative of the soul's journey. And sometimes in my previous videos I have talked about the major arcana cards representing the Fool's journey, but I also see it as representing the soul's journey. And I'm going to talk about a few of the cards from that approach. And I also wanted to say that this perspective of seeing the major arcana from a soul's journey perspective is mainly for my spiritual path and spiritual practice. I'm talking about this from that perspective, not from the approach for tarot reading. So I wanted to make that point so that people watching may think that you could use this approach for tarot reading. I don't think it really fits in with that, but I think this is something worth thinking about as far as reflection on some of the major arcana cards is concerned. And I'm going to talk about some of the cards in particular because I wanted to talk today about the soul's passage. And by that I mean what happens with the soul from the moment of death. And the cards I'm going to show, I'm going to talk about each one separately, and I'm also going to mention the tarot associations which come from the Golden Dawn, because I always use those associations. And I'm going to talk about them also explaining why I see some of these cards in that way. So the first three cards I'm going to at first group together because these are three cards that always puzzled me from a major arcana perspective. And they are the three cards that are sometimes called the celestial cards. And by that I mean cards that particularly have to do with the heavens, the stars and the heavens. Like particularly the star card. And that card is very obviously to do with the heavens. So these three cards are sometimes referred to as the celestial cards. Because I have researched and studied tarot for many years, I have sometimes seen these three cards referred to as the celestial cards, because the card before this is the Tower card, and it always puzzled me how the cards that follow from there are particularly celestial and unworldly. So here is the Star card, and the Moon card, another celestial card, and the Sun card. And all three of these are what you would think of as celestial cards. So I'm going to talk about each one. And starting with the Star card, which is associated with Aquarius, with the Golden Dawn associations. And I'm going to mention a bit of astrology here too, because I think it helps to describe also why I see these cards from a spiritual perspective as soul passage cards. So the star card being associated with Aquarius, which is known as the water bearer. And you can see that it is representing the water bearer here. And Aquarius is a humanitarian sign. So it represents humanity. And then you might think, well, what is the connection with humanity and the stars? And from a science point of view, it's been well known for quite a long time that humans are composed of the same matter that the stars are composed of, which is carbon. So there is actually a link between humans and the stars, a direct link, even though it's not really all that well known or thought about. And there are indigenous peoples who believe that we come from the stars and that we return to the stars when we die, that is where our soul returns and that is where we belong. So that's interesting too when you think about that the indigenous people believe that. There's quite a few indigenous peoples who believe that from different parts of the world. So I very much see the star card as representing the human soul itself as well as humanity. So this card has got quite a connection to humanity and the stars and the soul. The next one is the moon, which is associated with the sign of Pisces. And this card, from what I know about Pisces as an astrologer, Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, the very last sign. And this card, from a spiritual perspective and from a soul perspective for me, actually represents the passage of the soul at the point of death. And the sign of Pisces can represent that too, because it is the very last sign. It represents the ultimate ending from an astrological perspective, because the 0 point of Aries is the very beginning of the spark of life. So the very end of the zodiac, the very last sign, represents the ending or the ceasing of life. So for me, this card has a deeper meaning than the usual meanings associated with this card, because of the additional meanings that are associated with Pisces. And Pisces is a very spiritual sign. it's not a very worldly sign. It's not even considered, it's not even connected to matter or material things. It's more to do with the ether. So from that perspective, you can see that this card, from a Pisces perspective, can very much be seen as the soul's passage itself, the soul passing over from this world to the next. And you can see that fitting in with the idea of the path between the two towers as well. So this card particularly represents the soul's passage from this world to the next. And the next card is the Sun. And this card is associated with the Sun in the Golden Dawn. And from a higher perspective, from a spiritual perspective, if the previous card of the Moon is to do with the soul's passage, this card would represent the soul at the point when it's actually released from the body. This is why there is so much joy and freedom in this card. This is when the soul has arrived at the other side. And in Kabbalah, the Sun is seen from a high perspective as well. In Kabbalah, which is what the tarot is based on, particularly the Golden Dawn tarots, of which Rider-Waite was a member, the Sun in Kabbalah has a very high bearing that is much higher than the worldly meaning of the Sun. So for me, this card does represent the soul being released and arriving and being on the other side after the soul has passed from the body, from the Moon and Pisces card. Then the Judgment card. This card is connected with the planet Pluto, with the Golden Dawn associations. And of course, from a soul passage perspective and soul's journey perspective, I do not see this card in the usual way as far as the judgment associated with the religious approach of the last day scenario. Pluto as a planet is associated with renewal, and it's also associated with regeneration. So for me, this card represents the period of time that the soul actually is being renewed before the soul reincarnates. And whether or not a soul will reincarnate or not. So it's a kind of a purification process. And that does not have to be a bad thing. From a spiritual perspective, judgment does not mean the same thing as it does in religious ways. It's a different approach. So there is a purification process of some kind that a soul would participate in. Even the Tibetan approach, which is in the Tibetan book of Living and Dying, there is a idea about a period of time that probably cannot be measured from a worldly perspective, but there is a measurement of time, that a period that a soul will be in a state of purification before the soul would reincarnate again, or whether it will stay on the other side for a longer period of time or indefinitely, whatever that is, whatever that means for that particular soul. So that's how I see this card, particularly in relation to the planet Pluto, particularly to do with a period of purification of some kind. And then we come to the World card, which is associated with the planet Saturn, with the Golden Dawn associations. And the planet Saturn is particularly, in astrology, is to do with karma. And this card is sometimes called the universe, and it's called the universe in the Thoth deck. So I think for me, it can actually mean both the world as we know it, and it also can represent the universe. So this card, for me, as far as the soul journey is concerned, would represent the lessons that are associated with karma. And it's a card of completion. To me, this can represent that the period of purification is completed. And here the soul will be possibly given another soul contract. And this can be where the soul is completing one soul contract before it begins with another soul contract. And it can also mean the completion of karma, and whatever that means as far as whether the soul contract involves reincarnation or whether it is going to be the learning of karmic lessons on another level that may not include reincarnation. So of course, after that, if there's going to be another incarnation, there's a return of the Fool. which is why it is numbered 0. And this card for me represents the soul journey, the beginning of the soul journey. And this is associated with the planet Uranus in the Golden Dawn associations. And I think the numbering of 0 is very appropriate too. The number 0 is a perfect circle, which also has an eternity kind of association with that. And the planet Uranus, in very old mythology, is also associated with the very beginnings of time, before life even existed, before the earth was even created. So the planet Uranus can be representing the universe itself as well. So there are some of my thoughts on particular major arcana cards representing the soul's journey and the passing of the soul. Particularly these cards that I've spoken about, and why I feel these particular cards represent that. So I hope you enjoyed hearing some of my thoughts about the soul's journey and the passage of the soul in connection with these particular major arcana cards. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.